What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Hope everybody's doing well. There's a lot going on in the NFL right now, and if you ask me, there's too much going on in the NFL at the moment. You got the Colts benching their second-year quarterback, Anthony Richardson, for the rest of the season. Was this a move that had to be made, or did they further hinder his development? The Panthers, they are sticking with Bryce Young as their QB1, even though Andy Dalton is healthy enough to return to the lineup. I'm going to be breaking down what this decision shows about the Panthers' future plans. Does the NFL have a quarterback development problem? Because that's what the theme of this episode is about. You got two young quarterbacks from the same class, both in their second seasons, who have both been benched, and their confidence has looked to be shot. Do you have too many franchises out there that are seeking instant gratification out of these young quarterbacks, or are they not giving them enough time to develop? I'm going to be talking about the hidden layer that people are glossing over when it comes to this question about the NFL having a potential quarterback development problem. And I got thoughts on the Ravens trading for wide receiver Diontae Johnson, how he's going to impact their offense, and what acquiring him means for their Super Bowl expectations. If you're new and you haven't already, hit that like button. Helps us out in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content and when we go live. You can find us on all podcasting platforms. We are not just a YouTube channel. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. The links to the Apple and Spotify versions are in the description down below. If you enjoyed this episode, we would greatly appreciate it if you give us a 5-star review. Let's dive into it. When Anthony Richardson declared for the 2023 NFL Draft, mostly everybody knew that this dude was going to be a developmental project in the NFL. He only started 1 year at Florida, and he didn't even start the entirety of that season because he got injured. And then he gets taken 4th overall by the Indianapolis Colts. And you would think that they would sit him for his rookie season, let him learn behind Gardner Minshew, because the thing about Anthony Richardson, for why he was viewed as a developmental project, is that when he was at Florida, the dude had really inconsistent accuracy. His footwork was a work in progress as well, but he had all the physical traits that you look for in a potential elite quarterback. Rocket ship for an arm, insane athlete. The dude 6'5" and runs 4.43 at 255 pounds. This dude is like a monster truck or a tank or a war machine, however you want to describe it, at quarterback. And yet, although the Colts knew this guy was going to be a long-term project, he wasn't going to be a plug-and-play guy like C.J. Stroud and Jaden Daniels. It was to many people's surprise when the Colts named him the starting quarterback week 1 last year over Gardner Minshew. Now, last year, he played pretty solid considering what the expectations was, although it was a small sample size that we got to see out of him because his rookie year got cut short due to a season-ending shoulder injury. So you go into year 2, and over the course of this offseason, Anthony Richardson went from being overhated to being overhyped because people seem to forget that even though he does have a lot of similarities to Cam Newton, this dude wasn't going to take a big, massive leap in his second season and have a year equivalent to Cam Newton's 2015 season. So you have a guy that looks pretty decent in his week 1 start, year 2 against the Houston Texans. But ever since week 1, this dude's play has been really bad. He has one of the lowest completion percentages out of any quarterback that has started in the past decade, completing 44% of his passes. That's on par with Tim Tebow's completion percentage in 2011 when he led the Broncos to the playoffs. And Anthony Richardson recently, he had a game when they played against the Texans again, and he ended up tapping his helmet. He wanted out of the game because he was too tired. And then in the post-game press conference, he even noted that, yeah, I had to get a little bit of a breather. I needed a little bit of a break. I was tired. And he was kind of laughing about it. So after that, he started getting a lot of backlash from people on social media and former players, current players, and whatnot, because you can be tired, but you're the quarterback, dude. You're supposed to be the face of the franchise. You can't have enough energy to hand the football off. And with how bad his post-game press conference was, it made people start, raising their eyebrows. It's like, you got a dude who's not only playing bad football, but he's not holding himself accountable. And the Colts end up benching him. Now, there are two ways that you can look at this decision. One way is that the Colts are hurting this dude's development because you knew when he was coming out of college that he was going to be a developmental project. Therefore, you were going to have to roll with the growing pains that he was going to have, which includes him being 2 of 14 at halftime, right? But although he is playing bad football, this is somebody who has been thought of as a high character guy. His teammates like him. The guys in the organization love him. But to make those comments after the game, just flat out admitting, hey, I quit on my team, is something that doesn't sit right with the players in the locker room and definitely the guys who made the decision to pull the trigger on drafting him 4th overall in 2023. So therefore, you want to bench the dude to teach him a lesson, but at the same time, are you willing to hurt his long-term development? Because this guy needs reps. The only way he can get better is by getting meaningful in-game experience. And yet, you're going to bench him for a guy that's 40 years old. And even though Joe Flacco gives you a good chance to make it to the playoffs, what's the point of making it to the playoffs when you're probably going to be nothing more but a wild card exit at best? And you just wasted a whole year of what could have been used for Anthony Richardson to develop, when next year, when he enters year 3, he could end up taking that massive jump and end up playing at the level that was expected when they drafted him 4th overall. Now, that is a reasonable argument, for Anthony Richardson not getting benched. Yeah, the dude made a decision that wasn't really that smart, and he didn't handle it well in the post-game press conference. But at the same time, like, the guy's young. He's going to make mistakes. He's also going to make mistakes when it comes to talking to the media. And he doesn't have a lot of experience playing a quarterback position anyway. So for him to think that he can just tap out and get a breather on the bench kind of shows his lack of experience and his immaturity to the position. But the other side of the argument is that, okay, yeah, we know that this guy needs development, but you mean to tell me the only way Anthony Richardson can develop is by starting when he obviously isn't good enough to be a starter right now? Let me ask you something. How many other teams would Anthony Richardson start on right now? He wouldn't start over Gardner Minshew with the Raiders. He wouldn't start over Drake May with the Patriots. He probably will only start on maybe 1 or 2 teams, right? And in the NFL, the acronym NFL stands for not for long, which means that you have coaches and executives in the Colts organization that don't have forever in a day to wait for this dude to reach his full potential. When you have a team that has a young quarterback that needs a lot of reps to get better, but they're in position to win, they're in position to make it to the playoffs, it's kind of hard when you make this decision being Shane Steichen, because we got an opportunity to win. So why would we pass up on that just to be held back by a quarterback that obviously isn't ready to start right now? Because Anthony Richardson is far from a finished product. Colts fans know this. So therefore, it would have made more sense just to bench this dude, his rookie season, rather than throwing him out to the wolves early into his career when he obviously wasn't ready. Because it's like, once you commit to a guy and you're going to start him this young, it's really hard to bench him for him not to lose his confidence. And then you go back to him and he just all of a sudden magically develops into the player that you hoped he would become when you drafted him 4th overall. And you got to prioritize, losing in favor of his development rather than prioritizing winning, which most teams do due to how young he is and the fact that he needs experience. But for the Colts right now, you're in a similar situation to where the 49ers were with Trey Lance not too long ago. You know, Trey Lance, like Anthony Richardson, was really raw coming out of college, needed a lot of development. It wasn't going to be just a plug and play kind of player. And the Trey Lance situation ended off pretty ugly. Even though they benched him for a year, he didn't play, they let him develop. There in year two, they pretty much handed him the starting job, and he got injured. But even when he was healthy, he wasn't playing good enough football. So when he got healthy enough, you got everybody saying how he needs opportunity to prove himself. Yet the 49ers have a prime opportunity to win the Super Bowl. Which one are you going to prioritize? Developing that young quarterback and missing your shot at winning a potential Lombardi, or are you going to roll with the guy who gives you the best chance to win it all? I think the answer was pretty evident. And in the NFL, I still believe that there has to be a precedence when you prioritize winning over everything, because this is a production-based business. And even though Anthony Richardson is very young into his career, you know, you don't have all day to wait for these guys to show you something. You know, Anthony Richardson, he has shown you glimpses of what he could be. He's had a few games. Like, we saw how good he played week one this year against Houston. We saw him have a good game week one last year against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the potential is obviously there. You just have a quarterback that's so young that he hasn't been able to put it all together yet. But there's more than one way to developing a quarterback than just throwing him out to the wolves. Patrick Mahomes sat on the bench for a whole season. You had Justin Herbert, who wasn't a day one starter right out the gate. He sat a few weeks behind Tyrod Taylor. There's nothing wrong with Anthony Richardson developing on the bench, holding that clipboard, watching Joe Flacco, watching him in practice. That's really where Anthony Richardson belongs. If this dude is going to tap out in the middle of the game and he needs a break, well, he can get all the rest that he needs on that doggone bench, holding that clipboard, learning from Joe Flacco. You can view this, if you're a Colts fan, as a bad handling of the situation, or you can view it as an opportunity for Anthony Richardson to reset, because this is a dude that was already raw, remember. And when you got a guy that super raw needs development, it makes no sense just to throw him out there, even if he does need the reps. It would make more sense for you to develop him in practice, behind the scenes, and then you throw him out there when he's a little bit more acclimated to the playbook and has a better understanding of the speed of the game, because right now, the game just looks too fast for Anthony Richardson. And throwing him out there, allowing him to struggle, I don't really see that being great for his long-term success, because he can go out there, struggle, and learn, but he can also struggle and hurt his confidence. His confidence might have already been hurt before he got benched, contrary to what he was saying in his post-game press conference, when he was saying he was a good enough passer. He's like the second best running quarterback in the league behind Lamar. Anthony Richardson is a very young player. And a lot of Colts fans like to make the argument that, well, Josh Allen struggled his rookie season. He wasn't no better. Yeah, but Josh Allen wasn't quitting on his team, and Josh Allen never had any game his rookie season when he was 2 of 14 passing at halftime. You know, and the Bills also weren't a team that was in playoff contention with a veteran behind them that was better than what he was at that moment. And Josh Allen also took a really big jump in improvement from year one to year two. We haven't really seen that out of Anthony Richardson. Even though the brother got hurt, Joe Burrow got hurt his rookie season, and what did he do year two? He took them to the Super Bowl. So there's more than one way for a guy to develop other than starting and stinking up the joint. You know, we knew Anthony Richardson was going to be a project, so therefore he never should have started his rookie season. They should have just rolled with Gardner Minshew, and if they would have done that, they probably would have made it to the playoffs last year, since Minshew was the better of the two. And this year, you got a chance to make it to the playoffs, and for Shane Steichen, this could look really good when it comes to how he's viewed in the eyes of Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard, their general manager, because you still don't know how good of a coach Shane Steichen is. You know, he went 9-8 last year, but if you have a bad season this year and he was to have another bad season next year, he probably would get fired. These coaches only get 3 years to show that they have what it takes to lead a franchise as the head man. And when you are playing as bad as what Anthony Richardson is right now, lowest completion percentage that we've seen out of any starter in the past decade, you got to sit down and reset. And I feel like this is probably the best thing that could happen for Anthony Richardson's career. Tom Brady said that a lot of these quarterbacks get thrown out there before they're ready. And there's a great point when he says that. He also alluded to quarterback play in the league being worse now than what it's ever been, because you got guys like Anthony Richardson, who people hope could become the next Lamar or next Josh Allen, that aren't good enough to be starting at this level early into their career. Anthony Richardson probably should have been given the Jordan Love recipe, where you sit him for 3-4 years, and then eventually year 5, his contract season, you would hope that he has learned enough for him to make that big stride in his development. But right now, the Colts, they're prioritizing winning over long-term development, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with wanting to win. You can say it's useless to win this season, make it to the playoffs just to lose in the wild card round, but it makes everybody in that organization feel good to know that at least you made it to the playoffs. At least you had a successful season, rather than, losing a bunch of games just for the sake of Anthony Richardson's development. I don't really think that's a great recipe for long-term success, because what if Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard see Anthony Richardson struggle for the entirety of this season, and they say, you know what, maybe Shane Steichen just isn't the right coach to develop this dude, and they fire him. So, guys are coaching for their jobs. You got dudes that are executives that also are making these decisions and trying to assemble the best team possible. So not only this team can win, but they can win as well, making sure that their family can have food on the table to eat, clothes on their back, a roof over their heads, a place to sleep at night. And it's more to these quarterback benchings when it comes to these younger players than what initially gets thought about on the outside looking in. If you were in Shane Steichen's shoes, which one would you choose to do? Risk losing in sake of this dude's development, and you put more pressure on yourself next year that you could possibly be fired if it doesn't work out? Would you rather show, hey, I've won my first 2 years, even if things don't work out how we planned in year 3 with Anthony Richardson, I still showed enough that I'm a good enough coach that we can just get another quarterback. You don't have all day to prove yourself in the NFL. And the quarterbacks are just as responsible for their development as what the coaches are. What has Anthony Richardson done off the field to improve? Because it looks like the brother has regressed a lot compared to how good he looked his rookie season, and he still wasn't really all that great. Some of those stats were a little bit misconstrued because he got injured early on, so we didn't get to see this dude throw the ball 30 times a game. If you are Indianapolis, nobody should ever make you feel bad for wanting to win over developing your young quarterback, when you got a guy on your bench that obviously gives you a good chance to win, and you got a dude that, yeah, he may be terrible, but you rather roll with him being terrible as long as he's accountable versus taking himself out of the game, setting a bad precedent in the locker room, growing out of favor, and you don't hold him accountable. You keep throwing him out there. Imagine how the other guys in the locker room would have felt if Anthony Richardson still got to keep his job after what he did and the comments that he made. Those guys, they don't really care about this dude developing as much as they should. These dudes get paid to do a job, and they want the quarterback out there that gives them the best chance to make plays so they can continue to show what they can do, so they can continue to rack in those millions of dollars. So with the Indianapolis Colts benching Anthony Richardson, I believe it was the right thing to do. Most people, they don't look at it from a coach's standpoint. They just look at it from, a fan standpoint. But who's to say that him being on the bench can't help him develop neither? Because he needs to observe Joe Flacco. He needs to look at a veteran do it. So maybe when he gets his next opportunity next year, he have a better understanding of what it takes to be a starting caliber quarterback in this league, learning from a dude in Joe Flacco that's playing some of the best football of his career, although in the later stages. The Carolina Panthers are not giving up on Bryce Young yet, people. He is still going to remain their starting quarterback for the Week 9 matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Even though Andy Dalton is healthy enough to return to the lineup, they're sticking it out with Bryce. And what this decision shows me is that the Panthers are going all in on tanking for the first overall pick in next year's draft, which they currently have prime positioning to get that because they got the worst record of the NFL at the moment at 1-7. And Bryce Young, you're hoping that even though you are tanking to possibly draft his replacement, maybe he can catch a little fire during the second half of the season. Him sitting behind Andy Dalton for a couple of games, maybe he's able to reset and play some good football, or at least look halfway close to the player that we thought he would be when he was coming out of Alabama. But that's just wishful thinking, because I'm just going to tell you guys the honest truth about Bryce Young. This brother is never going to be a good quarterback in the NFL. He's a backup QB at best. You don't need 3 years to figure out if a guy can play or not. And if you played football on any level, college, professionally, middle school, pee-wee, you know that it doesn't take that long in practice to figure out the guys who are going to start for you, the dudes who actually can play, and the guys who are going to be the bench warmers or play watchers, as what I used to like to call them. Because in football, you either can play or you can't play. If you don't perform in practice, you're not going to perform in games. And Bryce Young, we've seen a good amount of him to know that he's not good enough to be the franchise quarterback for any team. And it's similar to what happened with Kenny Pickett with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can say Bryce Young had a better situation or Bryce Young had a worse situation than what Kenny Pickett did, but in only 18 games, Kenny Pickett was out as the starter. The Steelers had seen enough. He didn't want to compete for his job as well, so they just shipped him off, and he's the backup quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles. Same thing with Desmond Ridder. This dude only got a year and some change to show his potential, and he got shipped off. Same thing with Malik Willis. In today's NFL, we've gotten much better at realizing when we need to move on from guys and when guys are worth keeping, such as Justin Fields. Justin Fields, he got a few years than what some of those other quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder did, because he wasn't as bad as what Bryce Young was. Justin Fields showed enough flashes that you wanted to give him a third, fourth year to see if he could put it all together, because he gave you a bigger sample size of his best performances than what Bryce Young has. Up to this point, Bryce Young has only had one great game, which was near the tail end of last season against the worst defense in the NFL, coached by Joe Burry, who now is unemployed, when you played the Green Bay Packers. And that was it. Ever since then, Bryce Young has had no performances where you can hang your hat off and say, yeah, like that game right there is the reason why we got to give Bryce Young a third season. If the dude has showed you throughout 19, 20 games that he's not good, he's not going to develop. There's only been one quarterback in recent memory that I can recall that struggled his first couple of seasons, and in year 3 or 4, he just developed into a solid starter, and that was Alex Smith. Is Bryce Young in a good situation? No, he's not. But when he had Diontae Johnson, Adam Thielen, and all these weapons that people claimed he didn't have at the time, he struggled with. And when Andy Dalton came in his first game as a starter this year, he led them to a win over the Las Vegas Raiders with a season high in yards, touchdowns, and points. And all the weapons that people said Bryce Young didn't have, all of a sudden were looking like great weapons for Andy Dalton. And you trade away Diontae Johnson to the Ravens, and you really don't give Bryce Young much to work with this year. And how's he really going to be able to show what he can do? But the point is, it's not really about Bryce Young developing anymore. It's kind of at a point where the Panthers are already eyeballing drafting a quarterback in next year's draft. And I don't know if they are going to be successful at getting Shedeur Sanders, because I don't think Dion would allow Shedeur to walk into a situation like this. Dave Canales, there's as many question marks about him and how good he is as a head coach and a play caller as there is with Bryce Young. But Bryce Young, being the first overall pick, you're expected to overcome situations like this. And when you have a quarterback that is scared to throw the ball more than 20 yards downfield, that's a problem, because it's easy for defenses to play you. And all Bryce Young does is throw checkdowns. Against the Denver Broncos last week, he didn't look improved. After that touchdown that they got, thanks to the Panthers defense getting that fumble on the Broncos opening drive, the Panthers didn't get a single first down but one until the fourth quarter, which is when they were able to get that garbage time touchdown, and they made it 28-14. But the Panthers offense wasn't even able to get the ball past the 50 the majority during that game. And you can say the Broncos got a great defense and use that as an excuse to justify Bryce Young not really improving that much, but there weren't really any moments during that game where Bryce Young made any plays that showed what he could be if you gave him a third season. And this is Bryce Young's audition at this point. He right now is not only playing for the right to stay on this team, but he's playing for the right to get an opportunity to start next year, because if the Panthers were to trade him or cut him, all teams would view him as a backup. He wouldn't get an opportunity to compete to be the starting quarterback on any franchise next year. Do you think Kenny Pickett is going to have the opportunity to be a starting quarterback again? No, because none of those dudes have flashed anything early into their career to show you that they potentially could become a franchise quarterback. Meanwhile, for Mac Jones, he may get another opportunity, because it's not like this dude was just complete garbage all the years he was in New England. His first season, he led them to the playoffs. And then when Josh McDaniels left to become the head coach of the Raiders, that's when things went left for Mac Jones, because the Patriots didn't have a good personnel around them. We know all of the bad personnel decisions Bill Belichick made, on top of making the defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia, Mac Jones' offensive coordinator for his second season. So for Bryce Young, you don't really have anything on your resume that's been impressive outside of that one outstanding game that you had against the Green Bay Packers last year. So even though you don't have a lot of talent to work with, you do have enough pieces around you where you got Xavier Legette, who Bryce and his father wanted the Panthers to draft. You do got a decent offensive line. The Panthers' offensive line is not trash. The reason why Bryce Young gets sacked so much is because he runs into sacks, literally. If you go and you watch his game against the Chargers week 2, he runs out the pocket, scrambles to the left, and you're screaming at the TV, Bryce, throw the ball before you get hit. Bryce, throw the damn football before you get your ass popped. And the dude still gets popped anyway. The dude has no awareness. He just doesn't have a good feel for the game. And it just looks like the NFL is just way too fast for him. And sometimes when you draft these quarterbacks, they look good in college, but their college game, how they played at the collegiate level, doesn't translate to the NFL game, just because NFL and college are just two different sports. The field is more condensed. You don't have wider margins. Some of the gimmicky offensive stuff that Alabama might have did don't work in the NFL. And Bryce Young is also undersized. And not only are you on a team with limitations, but you have to deal with your own limitations, not being able to see over the line, and you can't throw in the middle of the field, and you also don't have a strong arm. C.J. Stroud would have the Panthers in a much better situation right now than what they are with Bryce Young. This dude is on his second coaching staff in 2 years. Frank Wright, as bad as how things went his first season coaching up Bryce Young, when you look at his rap sheet, you know, he's been pretty good with a lot of quarterbacks. Carson Wentz got a good amount of juice out of him. Phillip Rivers, you know, Andrew Luck. It's just that he got a player that he didn't really want. He wanted C.J. Stroud. But the owner, David Tepper, wanted Bryce Young. And that goes to show how dysfunctional of a situation Bryce Young is in. But, you know, he doesn't really do anything to make this situation better. Nobody, if the Panthers head coaching job was open right now, and you had coaches who were jumping at the bit who wanted to take this job, it would be because Bryce Young has shown enough that he could be a potential franchise quarterback. But the fact that, you know, nobody really wanted to work with Bryce Young, and he was a former first overall pick, shows you everything that you want to know. Having a guy like Bryce Young should be enticing to some of the best head coaching candidates out there. But even with you having a Looney Tune owner, when you got stability at quarterback, coaches want that because they know that if you got a great quarterback, it makes it easier to win. It makes it easier to keep a job. But when you got to rebuild or rehabilitate a quarterback that was failed by the previous head coach, you're already at a disadvantage. Bryce Young, the decision to give up DJ Moore and essentially Chris McCaffrey for this dude was the biggest draft day robbery in the history of the league, because the Bears took that, got several high caliber players out of that. You know, one of that being Caleb Williams, who should turn into a really good quarterback. Meanwhile, you got the Panthers right now. You're at the same stage that you were at a few years ago. You know, because you're going to be right back at the drawing board, having to draft another quarterback. Maybe you have to hire a new head coach if you don't like Dave Canales, because the dude looks a little bit in over his head. It looks like the Panthers have just given up on this season, because that's really what it is when you make the decision to start Bryce Young, because he doesn't give this team the best chance to win. You are 1-7 right now. Essentially, your season already is over, but you trade Diontae Johnson away. You still got a lot of good players there who haven't been traded. So it doesn't look like you're in a complete fire sale where you're just trying to rebuild and trade away everybody. But you're at a point now where it's like, we don't got a good team, but Bryce isn't good. We might as well see what the brother has. You feel me? And the dude is a first overall pick. He should be able to elevate some of these guys. Not every quarterback that gets taken high in the draft goes into a great situation. And just because you go into a great situation doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to develop. Trey Lance went into a perfect situation and he still was a bust. So for Bryce Young, I just believe that a lot of you Bryce Young stans, you just need to give it up on this dude. He is never going to be anything more than a serviceable backup quarterback at best. He can't throw the football past 20 yards. All he does is throw checkdowns. The offense was averaging at least somewhat 20 points per game with Andy Dalton as a starter. Although they got blown out by the Bears, but the offense was way better when Andy Dalton was the starter than what it is with Bryce Young. This dude is 2-19 as a quarterback, and he's lost to several rookie QBs as well. And it's just, some things are dependent on the situation. But if you are truly a franchise-changing quarterback, you're able to elevate your situation somewhat, and Bryce Young can't do that. And we haven't seen too many plays where Bryce Young has shown any ability to be an elite quarterback in this league. So it looks like the Panthers have officially given up on this season. They're mailing in, they're waving the white flag, and they're going to see what quarterbacks they can draft in next year's draft class, if any is worth drafting, because I don't think you'll get Shedeur Sanders. Cam Ward could be a good fit for you, but I got reservations about him, because as good as Cam Ward is, I don't know if Dave Canales is the right guy to help develop this brother. With Anthony Richardson getting benched and the Panthers looking like they have all but given up on Bryce Young, it raises the question, does the NFL have a quarterback development problem? Because Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young, they're only 2 years into their NFL careers, and it seems like their franchises have already gave up on them and admitted that they made a mistake drafting them. And decades ago, back in the 90s to 2000s, how it used to be when you drafted a quarterback in the first round is that you gave him at least 3-4 years to prove that he can be the franchise guy. And after that fourth year, you would just move on and get somebody else. But in today's new age of the NFL, it seems like a lot of teams and franchises have the need that they need instant gratification out of their young quarterbacks right away. When they draft them and they start them, they need them to play at a high level. Now, we've seen several instances of guys getting drafted in the first round. They start day one. They actually have been pretty good. Joe Burrow, C.J. Stroud, Tua, Justin Herbert, even though he had to sit a couple of weeks behind Tyrod Taylor, he had one of the greatest rookie seasons ever for a first-year quarterback statistically at that time. So we've seen numerous quarterbacks that had to start early during their rookie seasons have success, but yet you've had guys like Kenny Pickett, Bryce Young, and AR who you start day one and it was tough sledding for the respective franchises that drafted them. And the thing about developing quarterbacks is it's not all about going to a great situation. Because like we've seen with Trey Lance, you can go to a great situation, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be a stud, because sometimes you may not be good enough for said team, considering the talent that you have around you. Because when you got a talented team, it means that you're expected to win. It's a difference being in a situation like Josh Allen, where you go to a Bills team that wasn't expected to be that good and you're pretty much rebuilding. But when you're going to a team like the Colts or the 49ers that either are a Super Bowl contender or a playoff contender, all they need is good quarterback play, and you got a guy behind you that is able to outperform you, then it makes it difficult for that young quarterback to develop, because there's so much more pressure on him to be good at that moment versus focusing on his development, because you're in a position to win. And it's tough when you have these young quarterbacks that aren't good enough to help you maximize your potential. Because if you're the 49ers, if you start Trey Lance, you don't make it to the Super Bowl. But you start Brock Purdy, you go to the Super Bowl. With the Indianapolis Colts, you miss the playoffs if you don't start Joe Flacco and you keep rolling with Anthony Richardson. But I don't feel it's in the best interest of a lot of these coaches and these GMs to prioritize developing a quarterback over immediate success, because there's no guarantee that if things go left, you're going to be around for another season. You see, these quarterbacks don't have a lot of time to reach their potential, because these coaches don't have a lot of time to wait on these coaches or to wait on these quarterbacks to reach their potential. It is a production-based business. And when you don't produce results, you get fired. And we're just in a new age of the NFL where these quarterbacks only got a year and a half to show how good they can be. And you don't necessarily have to look like an elite quarterback within your first couple of starts, but you do have to show enough promise that that team will be encouraged by how far you've grown for year one to year two, to have enough confidence to bring you back for a third season, like the Bears did with Justin Fields. Justin Fields, his first 2 seasons, he showed enough to warrant getting a third year. And the third year was up and down, but it's not like the brother was completely terrible. It's just that the Bears were in a situation where you got the number 1 overall pick. You had the ability to upgrade that quarterback because you had a head coach that was on the hot seat. And that's why the Bears traded Justin Fields to the Steelers, and they went ahead and they drafted Caleb Williams, because Matt Eberflus felt getting Caleb Williams gave them the best chance to win right away, along with Brian Poles, because they viewed him as an upgrade from Justin Fields. The NFL, not for long league. You don't have forever to prove yourself. These owners are impatient. They're not down to give a coach 4 to 5 years to show that he can develop a quarterback. If he doesn't do a good job in the first or second year, he gets fired and you're bringing in another head coach. You know, as tough as it is to hear that, you want to believe that if you give a quarterback 4 or 5 years, he'll figure it out. But at the same time, has there ever been a quarterback that's been given up on too easy or too soon? Geno Smith, we have to wait 8 years for this brother to play high-level football. You know, a lot of teams don't have 8 years to wait on a guy to develop. And even then, Geno Smith is probably the only example in Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield of guys who were given up on a little bit too soon. But with Baker Mayfield in his situation, the dude was immature. He wasn't getting along with his teammates, and the Browns felt like they could upgrade, and they were a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl contender. That's why they made the trade for Deshaun Watson. And Baker Mayfield, he's been really good. But at the same time, though, at that moment, he wasn't good enough, considering the expectations that the Browns within that organization have for themselves. And expectations for team success oftentimes speeds up how fast they want their quarterback to develop. But if Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix are having success in their rookie seasons, and Caleb Williams has had moderate success, although he's been up and down, why can't Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson do the same? You know, are these guys in better situations? Somewhat. But Caleb Williams has a better situation than Bryce Young, and he's not doing good, or as good as what people expected. Anthony Richardson has a pretty good team around him, a decent offensive line, decent wide receivers, and the dude's only completing 44% of his passes. Which gets me to my final point. it doesn't take long to realize guys who can and can't play at the NFL level. It only took the Steelers 19 starts out of Kenny Pickett to realize that he wasn't franchise quarterback material. It took the Jaguars only like 20 games in to realize that Blaine Gabbert wasn't going to cut it as the franchise quarterback. Sometimes you can watch guys early into their careers and realize that they just aren't starting caliber material. And there haven't really been too many quarterbacks that teams gave up on early in their careers, and they came out 8 years later and they were really good. Sam Darnold, you can't really use him or Baker Mayfield as a good example, because if these guys weren't capable starters, they wouldn't have been given several other opportunities to be a starter. Sam Darnold, he started for the Carolina Panthers a few games, and he also was a backup for the 49ers, and they had no problem rolling with him if he was, had to be asked upon to start, and he beat out Trey Lance. It's the same thing with Geno Smith. It's just that it's not like quarterbacks who can't play, they just get thrusted into another opportunity to be a starter. Like, no, if you can't play, you don't get another chance to start. Kenny Pickett would never start again unless a guy gets injured. Bryce Young would never get an opportunity to start again. Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, they all had opportunities to start again because the teams that they signed with, like the Minnesota Vikings and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, saw enough out of them based off what they did previously after a few stops, although things didn't go right, that they were still good enough to be capable backups. Bryce Young hasn't showed that. Anthony Richardson hasn't showed that. And that's a problem with young quarterbacks in the NFL today when it comes to developing them. It's like there's never been a quarterback that a team gave up upon too early that, it was a bad decision. Because if a guy actually can play, he will get another opportunity to start again. Mac Jones eventually will have an opportunity to start again somewhere else. But Bryce Young won't. Same thing with Kenny Pickett. It's going to be the same thing with Trey Lance. Where is he at right now? If Trey Lance is so good, why did the Cowboys extend Dak Prescott? You feel me? When it comes to developing quarterbacks, it's not an exact science to it, how some folks are led on to believe. Just because you go to a great situation doesn't mean you're going to turn into a great quarterback, because the downside of being a rookie quarterback and going to an already great situation is that the expectation is to win. You can't say, we just have to accept not making it to the playoffs or not being a Super Bowl contender just for the sake of a guy's development when we have a team that is already good enough to compete. So why would we wait to compete when we could, strike while the iron is hot and just start the guy who gives us the best shot to win? That's why they call it the not for long league. Not only do players have really short careers in the NFL, but they also have a short amount of time to show what they can do. There are other guys who are more than capable of proving that they can get the job done, especially when you got a guy like Joe Flacco that's right behind you, or Andy Dalton, and he's better than what you currently have in your young quarterback. That's not a good sign either. When your backup is better than your young quarterback that you invest the first round pick on, it shows that he's not progressing. And also, what are these quarterbacks doing to help their development? Are they solely banking on the coaching staff helping them out? Or are they putting in extra work? I know Brock Purdy, I've seen this dude a couple of times around Jacksonville, around the Ponte Vedra area. Him and Caleb Williams come down to Jacksonville in the offseason to go to this special kind of sports science facility that, uses a lot of science to help them improve their brand of play. That's why Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy are so good at making those all-platform throws, because of them using a lot of time in the offseason training and, using advanced training methods to improve their game. Is Anthony Richardson doing that? Is Bryce Young doing that? When you get drafted as high as what some of these guys do, top 5, top 10 to draft, you are expected to overcome limitations. Joe Burrow, his second season, led the Bengals to the Super Bowl behind the worst offensive line in the league that year. He's the only quarterback in the NFL in history that's won a playoff game despite being sacked double-digit times. Cam Newton, The Panthers didn't always have great rosters. He didn't have stacked receivers. Hell, he won MVP, took Carolina to the Super Bowl with his two best options being Greg Olsen, who was on the tail end of his career, and Ted Ginn. Like Andrew Luck. This dude got beat up behind bad offensive lines for the majority of his career and still was leading the Colts to the playoffs consistently. That's what a franchise quarterback is able to do. He's able to take a bad hand and still be able to somewhat win a few games with it. C.J. Stroud is another example. Justin Herbert. This dude has overcame several head coaching changes, and most of the times when you have a young quarterback that is on his third, fourth head coach, he normally ends up being a bust, but Justin Herbert has been the exception to that. Why? Because he's just better. You can say it's unfair to expect every quarterback to be good their first year, but there's been a lot of other quarterbacks that have been good right out the gate, or at least shown a little bit of flashes of what they could be. Jalen Hurts, his rookie season wasn't that great, but he showed enough to give the Eagles more confidence in him going into year two. And year two, he made a major leap into his improvement. Sometimes it's not always about situation. The Commanders don't really have that good of a team around Jaden Daniels. Their offensive line sucks. Their run game is average to above average, and the only receiver they have is Terry McLaurin. I've seen Jaden Daniels throw touchdowns to guys like Amalei Zaccheaus. I can't even think of the other dudes. Luke McCaffrey. This dude wasn't like a first or second round pick at receiver. He was like a midday pick. So it's like C.J. Stroud. The Texans were believed to be a worse situation at the time than what the Panthers were. And C.J. Stroud told the Texans that he wanted C.J. Stroud, so they drafted him. And Nico Collins just didn't become a 1,000-yard receiver right out the gate. It took C.J. Stroud to get there for Nico Collins to start cementing himself as one of the better receivers in the game. So when you have a franchise-changing quarterback, you know when you got that dude. And when you got a dude that may not be an elite quarterback, he can at least show that he's a serviceable quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa. But we haven't seen none of that over the last couple of years with all these quarterbacks that, the media wants to sympathize with and have empathy for, saying, oh, they gave up on them too soon. You don't have a lot of time in life to show how good you can be. Sometimes you got to make the most and, put your best effort forward with, only having 30 seconds to do it. You got to make the most of the opportunity, because the NFL, they're always going to find somebody who's capable of getting the job done if you can't prove to do it within the time frame that they have for you to do so. You can say it's unfair, but I can say that it's life. Life is unfair. I don't miss several opportunities that I wasn't able to maximize the short amount of time that I had with them. You feel me? And it's other people who have their jobs on the line, not just these quarterbacks, which is easy to think about, but you got head coaches who got to provide food on the table for their families. You don't got 4 to 5 damn years to wait for a guy to hit their stride. Daniel Jones got an extension because the Giants saw enough that they thought this dude could be a capable starter for the next couple of years, but it did backfire. But the dude was better early on during his career than what Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson have looked. So I don't really think it's a quarterback development problem, because drafting quarterbacks in the first round has always been a huge gamble. They got a low hit rate. Just drafting in general, not everybody's going to work out. And it's not more so there being a QB development problem. It's just this, that's just how the draft works. Some guys are going to turn into gems. Some guys are going to be studs, and other guys are going to be duds. What about these wide receivers that turn the bus? What about these defensive linemen that turn the bus? Could you say that they were given enough time to develop? Because the quarterback position isn't the only position on the team that requires younger guys to be developed. Not every edge rusher that gets drafted in the first round comes out with 10.5 sacks right out the gate. So I don't believe there's a quarterback development problem in the NFL. The problem is that you just have a lot of quarterbacks entering the league at a time where you don't have a lot of time to develop anymore. By the time you get midway through your second season, you got to show enough to give your franchise confidence that drafted you, hey, you deserve a third year. Unless we get out of you in year 3. And if you take a big step in year 3, then you get that mega contract that everybody's seeking to get. With the Ravens trading for Diontae Johnson, they now have two of the NFL's best route runners on the same team. You got Zay Flowers, who creates a lot of separation, runs really good routes, along with Diontae Johnson, who does the same. Lamar Jackson is going to have two receivers that, in third down situations, at least one of these dudes is going to be able to keep the drive alive and move those chains. And plus, you now have one of the deepest receiving corps in the NFL. Diontae Johnson, Zay Flowers, you can alternate both of those guys between playing in the slot and playing outside receiver. And then let's say Rashad Bateman continues to struggle. Diontae Johnson could take over and take his spot as the second best receiver in this offense. The thing with Diontae Johnson, however, is that he isn't the most consistent wide receiver when it comes to giving you good play on a week-to-week basis. Some weeks he can go for 11 catches, 123 yards, and a touchdown, and other weeks he can go for 2 catches, 4 drops, and give you nothing at all. And that's why the Ravens were able to acquire him without having to give up a lot of capital. Because from a skill point standpoint, you know, Diontae Johnson is one of those wide receivers that you at least should be able to get for a second, third round pick. You shouldn't be able to get this dude for a stale bag of Fritos and, you know, a flat Coca-Cola. But now that you have Diontae Johnson, he's going to bring such a unique element to your offense, because now you're going to have at least one receiver that's going to be open if you are Lamar Jackson. And Lamar now has a bunch of riches to choose from in terms of who he's going to throw the football to every play when he drops back the pass. You already got two great tight ends in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, and, you know, Zay Flowers, the dude has been a stud, and Rashad Bateman, he has his moments. He's not garbage. He's just mildly inconsistent, just like Diontae Johnson is. But now with Lamar having so many weapons in the passing game now, at least somebody has to be open. Every time the Ravens call a pass play, Lamar can be super confident that somebody is going to be able to, you know, beat their man and one-on-one coverage, and he can get the football to him. And now it improves their Super Bowl chances. Now with Diontae Johnson, there's no excuses for the Ravens not to win it all this year. You know, a lot of Ravens fans in the past have said that the team hasn't been as good, or the coaching staff has let Lamar Jackson down. Well, you can't use those excuses no more. Lamar Jackson, the young legend out of Pompano, he has to get it done this year. This dude has the most stacked offense in the league. Yeah, the defense isn't good, but listen, bro, like, you're not going to have teams every year that are stacked on both sides of the ball. You're going to have to sacrifice one for the other. And if I have Lamar Jackson on my team and I got to prioritize which side of the football I want to upgrade, offense, defense, I'd rather go with offense, because, I mean, the defense is going to take more than one or two players for the Ravens defense to tremendously improve. But you add Diontae Johnson to this offense, you now got the most unstoppable offense in the NFL pretty much, because somebody is going to be open, rather if it's Zay, Diontae, or Rashad Bateman, or whoever you got at tight end. You know, you're going to have one of the best passing attacks in the league from this point out, even though you already have that already with Lamar being second in passing touchdowns. But now, you know, with all these weapons, Lamar Jackson has what it takes to beat Patrick Mahomes, because the Chiefs, they got DeAndre Hopkins, but that's nothing close to the arsenal that Lamar has. The Ravens pretty much gave Lamar Jackson to Avengers pretty much. You got really good receivers. You got Derrick Henry, the best running back in the NFL right now. He should be in the MVP discussion. He's going to be your closer. So you're going to be able to close out games where you may be up a few possessions and you need to eat up that clock. Derrick Henry's going to get the job done. And your defense, although it struggled, they're good enough to get a few stops here and there. And the Chiefs right now, they're all defense, no offense pretty much. Mahomes is having the worst season of his career. He has more interceptions than touchdowns. Their offensive line is in shambles. There is no more excuses for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens not getting over the hump this year. They have to win the Super Bowl. And I don't like saying it's championship or bust for certain teams, but it definitely does feel like that with the moves that the Ravens have made. when you get Diontae Johnson, you sign Derrick Henry in free agency. If the Ravens can't win this year, you got to ask yourself if they ever win the Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson at the helm, because this is without a doubt the best team in the NFL from a talent standpoint. There are not too many teams that have the depth that the Ravens have at receiver and at tight end on offense, that have the depth that they do at running back. They don't just have Derrick Henry, but they also do have Justice Hill, who also has had a couple of good performances. And they also got that running back from ECU that was playing pretty good last year until he had like an ACL injury. He's going to come back eventually, Keaton Mitchell. So this is one of the deepest teams in the NFL. Their defense is struggling, but not because they don't have the talent, but more so because you lost a great defensive coordinator in Mike McDonald. But the Ravens now are out of excuses. They have to win it all this year, because if not, I don't know if they ever will.